Hello and welcome to this edition of ICAN on Air. Use this opportunity also to welcome my co-anchor, Olusesan. Yes, we call him Sheson Okunade, who is joining me at this edition. Sheson, you are welcome.
Good evening, sir, my main anchor, and to our listeners, my pleasure to be here this evening.
And of course, today we take a brief return to the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, which we always call the PIA. Experts on the subject are unanimous that the PIA represents an effort by Africa's leading oil-producing country to respond to changing domestic and global environment characterized by growing oil and gas farms, oil-producing countries in the region, militants in oil-rich communities, while remaining has diminished, concerns over climate change, fueling aggressive effects and efforts to reduce global consumption of fossil fuels. And this has driven divestment from the oil and gas by companies, institutions, and countries. Lately, our almighty PIA Act has been temporarily suspended in the wake of agitations against removal of subsidy on PMS. Of course, naturally necessitating our interrogation today on Nigerian Petroleum Industry Act 2021 and the Chartered Accountants matters arising. CHINWENDU ENECHI, ACA, joins us in our question and answer segment to drive us to better understanding of this subject. CHINWENDU ENECHI is a partner in the oil and gas and power practice at Anderson, Nigeria. He specializes in providing marketable tax management advisory solutions to companies in the oil and gas industry. He was and he still practices as team leader in one of the oil and gas industry, providing tax due diligence services in that company. And that entailed, really, because I was just looking at some of those backgrounds, that entailed a consideration of the fiscal and tax aspect of the PIB and other relevant legislations in the investment plan. More to unveil on our esteemed guests very shortly. Also, on this program, we are going to be sharing a few tidbits on an ICAN diary, letting you into a window of our world. Few announcements and few adverts. You want to stay connected? We shall be back with you shortly.
You deserve all the accolades on this special occasion of the International Women's Day. I especially recognize my queens in the Society of Women Accountants of Nigeria, SWAN, and all prospective female members of ICAN. I acknowledge that you are indeed queens, unique and elegant, breaking all gender barriers and positively impacting the accounting and finance space. Accept my hearty congratulations as I celebrate you today and always. Let's remain undaunted in our resolve to break the bias. Happy International Women's Day. Break the bias.
Oh, yes. Sheson, please join me to welcome our esteemed guests, CHINWENDU ENECHI, a partner in Anderson, Nigeria, into ICAN on Air.
With my
Thank you.
co-anchor, Chiwendu Enechi. You're welcome to ICAN on Air for today, Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. Our pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fatuke and Sheso. Thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to also say a big thank you to the Institute for putting this together and also welcome our online participants. We're hoping we'll have a great session today.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. So, without wasting our time, let's quickly just double into the discussion of today. And like you understand, we're talking about the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Act 2021 and the Chartered Accountant, the matters arising. Briefly, let me just ask this issue of PIA. Can you just give us a brief intro and also let us know if the PIA will achieve the objective of increasing our desired investment in the oil and gas industry?
Well, thank you so much, Sheso, for that question. I must say that we've been on this journey of this omnibus law in the oil and gas sector, which is the PIA that we have currently. We've been on this journey for over a decade. In the past, we've had multiple PIBs, as it were, back then. And at some point, we had them broken down into different segments. And I must say that at that time, it created a lot of uncertainty within the industry because investors were not really satisfied with what was going on. Because if you understand the oil and gas industry, you realize that it's a high risk industry. And if there's one thing that investors want to see, there is certainty. So when President signed the PIA into law, obviously it was a welcome development in industry. It brought that certainty that we were all seeking in the industry. I was speaking to one of my clients back then, prior to the signing of the PIA, and what the client was saying to me was that we just want to know with certainty what is in the law, so that we can evaluate it, look at the fiscal terms, see if it's still favorable, if we need to move investment elsewhere. And so having that PIA, what it gives investors is that certainty to look, we have something that we can build a model on. Because if you're going to if you're planning to make any investment anyway, you've got to run your financial model. We're all chartered accountants and we're very much familiar with that. You've got to run your financial model, do your forecast, and those financial models will have some tax elements in it. Now, if you have some level of uncertainty, it's difficult for you to forecast what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, especially when you know that there's a law that has been at the back burner for quite some time. So since we have that PIA now, it gives us that certainty. Now, speaking on whether it will give us the kind of the desired result that we want in terms of attracting investment. What I would like to say is that investors will typically just evaluate the attractiveness of any fiscal terms that you have along various lines. It all depends on what they are looking at. You're looking at stability of the contract terms that you have. You're looking at contract sanctity as well. You're also looking at the competitiveness of the physicals and of course license rights. So you're comparing with other countries, what is obtainable elsewhere, and beyond that, you're also looking at what is the climate, the business environment like, because you can have fantastic fiscals. If the environment is very toxic for investors, it makes it very difficult. So what I would like to say is, with all that, investors can then do their models, look at the fiscal terms that we have, compare them with the other jurisdictions, like maybe Angola and other places where you have crude oil discovery, and see whether it's something that is worth their while. If you ask me, the PIA does provides really interesting provisions that I would say that are quite attractive, particularly in the gas sector. If you look at what Nigeria is trying to do, we're trying to increase gas utilization. Obviously, everyone is talking about transition to clean energy. So when you look at all that, there are different sectors or subsectors within the oil and gas industry that the PIA addresses, and provides certain incentives, all geared towards, attracting investors, to Nigeria. So I would say that it's better than what we used to have. So obviously, it's got something really interesting in there that I think will attract investors. So time will tell whether the provision of the PIA will eventually lead to the realization of the kind of investment that we want to see in the industry.
Thank you very much, Chiwendu. You've actually been able to open our eyes to know that the new signed PIA definitely will bring certainty for investors, talking about giving a good business climate and, having the opportunity to compare our physical Earth with other climates and working in line with that major aim of the government of increasing gas utilization. And I want to believe that this will definitely bring more prosperity as desired. But let me take on this question again by asking you that can you just give us what are some key changes that our professional members as chartered accountant needs to be aware of concerning this PRA so that at least we can have our own contribution even as the bill has been signed?
Thank you so much, John, for that question, which I think is very, very apt. I think it's something that um, we professionals need to be aware of. Obviously, the PIA is broken down into three segments, which I like to. One of which is governance. Governance basically deals with issues around establishment of NNPC, for instance, NNPC Limited. The NNPC that we currently have today will then become a limited liability company with a commercial orientation. So that comes under governance. You also have the establishment of the midstream and downstream petroleum regulatory authority, which would then regulate certain aspects of the midstream and downstream sectors of that industry. And then you also have the establishment of the Petroleum Regulatory Commission, that would then take over the functions of what we currently call the DPR, Department of Petroleum Resources, some aspect of that of DPR with respect to licensing and other things. So that's the part on governance. So obviously you have other provisions with respect to governance, like establishment of midstream and downstream gas infrastructure fund, and also the Frontier Exploration Fund, which generated a lot of conversation in the country. Then you then have the segment that we call administration. Administration then speaks to various licenses that you have. In the past, we used to have what you call oil exploration license, oil prospecting license, oil mining lease. Now, what we have are new licenses, essentially the same thing but with new name. So what we then have, you have introduction of new license type like petroleum prospecting license, petroleum exploration license, and petroleum mining licenses. So they kind of mirror the old licenses in some way, but they just have a new name. And then, of course, you then go to the host community, that provision around the host community, which again also generated some form of a conversation with respect to how much was going to the host community. So we have that host community development trust that the Act then provides for, that will have a fund essentially that will be funded by the settlers. Settlers are the operators, the licensees, those who have license and operate within the host community, and they are supposed to fund it with 3% of their annual operating expenditure in preceding financial year. So what that means is at the end of every year, each settler within a community is supposed to transfer 3% of whatever was their actual annual operating expenditure into the host community development trust fund, which would then be used, to provide some needed infrastructure within that area. Now we then go to the physicals, which everybody likes to talk about. So there are a number of changes that we have. Obviously, what we used to know, or what we currently know in the petroleum profit tax as investment allowance or investment tax credits, or investment credit has been repealed, and the act then introduced what we call production allowance. Obviously, one major change that we have now is that upstream companies will then be required to pay companies income tax, at 30%, which is different from what we currently have in the petroleum industry, petroleum profit tax act. Of course, you then have the introduction of hydrocarbon tax of 15% and or 30%, depending on the kind of license that you have. So there are a number of other provisions, and you then have steeper penalties for non-compliance or certain offenses within the law. So I must say that it's no longer business as usual. As long as you convert to PIA, it's no longer business as usual. It's something that, as chartered accountants, we need to be aware of, so that we are well informed to advise our clients on the things that they need to begin to pay attention to, particularly when it comes to conversion, for instance, which I believe we'll get into during the conversation. Obviously, you need to be aware of the new changes in the law and how that affects your client's business, and they begin to have that conversation around conversion.
Hear me? I hope you can still hear me. Thanks for those expose. In your intro, I was happy. I was getting some vibes. You were talking about clean energy. Of course, you didn't talk about it, but there are other paradigm shifts where looking at fossil fuels, it's like Nigeria still looking backwards when others are looking forward. But let's look at this issue concerning clean energy. Global discussions has been around, talking about going on to the clean energy. Now, how does the PIA align with this in terms of putting us on the path towards this transition to clean energy?
Thank you so much, Mr. Fatuki. I think that's a very, very interesting question. I must say that I don't know whether I should use the word unfortunate. Unfortunately, the PIA doesn't have specific provisions that that speaks to transition to clean energy. But obviously, there are certain provisions within the PIA that supports that transition to clean energy. One of which is provision around gas flaring. If you understand what the government is trying to do, we're trying to move away from gas flaring. So you have very steep provisions within the PIA that discourages gas flaring. Was able to claim tax deductions on the gas flare fee. But now, under the PIA, you don't have that. So what it means is that if you incur any expense with respect to gas flaring, you will not be able to claim tax deduction. Two, obviously, like I said, during my intro, I did talk about the provisions of the PIA tries as much as possible to increase gas domestication and improve gas utilization. Obviously, with focus on gas, that will help us, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel, for instance. And then you then begin to have conversation around more gas being made available in country for things like conversion to CNG gases. By the time you have such, that then reduces our reliance on. But that also comes with its own cost. What I would say is that the PIA has those kind of provisions that support that transition. And then I must not also forget the requirement of NMPC to also engage in renewable energy. And so that's a statutory provision that requires NMPC to make investment in renewable energy. So that also speaks to that transition to clean energy. And back to the CNG issue I was talking about. So if some provisions that we have in the PIA that tries as much as possible, or that we are hoping will lead to the kind of domestication that we want to see in the gas sector, for instance, what that would do is that it will increase the amount of gas that we have in country. Obviously, to do that, there are other issues that we need to deal with around gas investment, things around dealing with issues like improving our gas infrastructure and gas pricing and all that, because currently the PIA has certain provision that speaks to continued regulation of gas prices. Obviously, that's not the kind of thing investors want to see. You want to see a market that is a willing buyer, willing seller type of market, which then encourages investors to come in, and obviously it will make the IOCs, for instance, to begin to adhere to the domestic gas supply obligation that we have in the PIA. So, or domestic gas delivery obligation that we have in the PIA. And what that will do is to increase the amount of gas that we have locally. What we can then do with that gas, is enormous. You're talking about LPG, cooking gas, the CNG that I talked about. So obviously that helps us to shift, our focus from petrol, for instance, for car, to using CNG gases, and eventually we can get to where we really want to get to.
Oh, super, fantastic. Thank you very much for those elucidations. And I can see that our online participants are coming on. Yeah, Sheson, could you please field the question from Oluchi Sanusi?
Okay, Chiwendu, I can see from Olusi Sanusi asking us that what is the profit sharing contract like, and how viable is it possible to retrieve one's capital with this current infrastructure deficit in line with the PIA?
Thank you so much, Olusi Sanusi. I hope I got the name correctly. Interesting question, I must say. And I think speaking about viability of production sharing contract, first of all, it all depends on the terrain that you're operating in. Obviously, for production sharing contracts, you want to see players in the deep offshore. You most likely see joint venture arrangement within onshore and shallow waters. So for production sharing contracts, you're looking at a higher risk terrain. And speaking about the viability of such arrangements, all depends on where you're playing. Like I said, it's a high risk terrain. So you need to then ask yourself whether the fiscal that we have in the PIA is attractive enough for you to play in that area. Now, if you look at what we have in the PIA, for instance, the guys in the companies that will be operating within the deep offshore are completely exempt from hydrocarbon tax. So that is an incentive for someone who wants to play in that area. Now, you're asking how viable it is to retrieve your capital within this current infrastructural deficiency in line with the PIA. Now, if you are looking at the PIA itself and looking at, if I'm looking at your question and I'm asking myself, if you stay with crude oil production within the deep offshore, for instance, if you look at what crude oil price is doing today, you would agree with me that at the time people made their forecast, sometime last year, nobody expected crude oil prices to be shooting over $100 today. So obviously, you then need to look at some clauses that you have within the production sharing contract that you have with the government to evaluate that in line with what we have in the PIA to see how well you can recover your cost. But if you ask me, recovery of cost is a question of the kind of contract that you have, especially when you're talking about production sharing contracts. There are certain provisions within PSCs that speak to cost recovery, which is an arrangement you then have with NNPC or NNPC Limited, as you were, to know how much cost you can recover and at what time. I don't know whether that answers his question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Enechi. And I am aware very acutely before we came on this program that a lot of my friends from oil and gas, oil service are on. And so I will be doing a lot of justice by talking about licensing. And concerning licensing, I'd like to get this clarification from you. will the existing license holders under the PPT be required to convert to the new license under the PIA?
Thank you so much. That's an interesting question. Interestingly, the PIA also provides for that. But it all depends on the kind of license that you have. So if you are a marginal field producer, for instance, because there are fields that are categorized as marginal fields. If you're a marginal field producer, you are required to convert to PIA within 18 months from the inception of the act, which I think will expire by December or thereabouts. The act was signed into law in August last year. So by December, if you're a marginal field producer, then you should be making plans to convert. Now, for every other license holder that is not a marginal field producer, what the law says is that you can voluntarily convert if you want. So you can do an evaluation of the PIA and your own business forecast to see, okay, whether it favors you to convert now or you wait at the time you're about to renew your license. So at the time you're about to renew your license, you must convert to PIA. So at that point, you no longer have that flexibility of deferring that conversion. You only have that now if your license is still up and running and you're not a marginal field producer. You have that flexibility of either deciding to convert now if you want to, or wait till you're about to renew your license.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. And I'd like to make this announcement to our online participants. If you are just coming in, we've been looking on ICAN on Air segment of the program question and answer today. The Nigerian Petroleum Industry Act 2021 and us, chartered accountants, I dare say, also friends of the profession, looking at matters arising. And we've been fielding Mr. Enechi, who has been throwing a lot of lights into hidden areas, perhaps that many do not know, and kind of resurfacing the already surfaced knowledge that some of the practitioners already have. I am very happy that our students who are also online are learning some of those nitty-gritties. Please keep your questions coming. We will field as many as we possibly can, and I'm going to be yielding to my co-anchor Sheson to fire the next question.
Thank you very much, Mr. CHINWENDU ENECHI. I think having understanding of the last question by the anchor on the licensing, let me ask this question again: that is it possible that the PIA provide for transfer or assignment of a license or permit by industry operator?
Thank you, sir. So again, speaking about licensing, yes, we have that. We have a provision within the PIA that obviously allows you to, transfer your license, to someone else if you feel like and maybe the economics of a particular investment doesn't favor you anymore, or you would like to move elsewhere. You can relinquish that license and transfer it to someone else. However, such transfer has to be made with the consent of the minister, Minister of Petroleum. So the minister needs to okay such transfer before you or assignment. And I like to also mention that because I've had, the course of my own career, I've had clients come to me and ask whether if I'm just selling shares within a company that has an asset or a license, can that be deemed to be a transfer of that license? And I like to say it here, and the PIA also speaks to that as well. Where you have a share transaction and someone is acquiring the shares of a company that has a license, and the new acquirer then takes a controlling interest within that company, that is deemed to be a transfer that requires the consent of the minister before that transaction can be consummated.
Yes, Thank you very much, Mr. Enechi. I'm going to give you a bit of a breather now and announce that we are going to be going on a short break. And when we come back, we get more insights from Mr. Enechi, especially in areas of companies operating in different levels of the value chain and how do they separate their operations. Please stay connected. We will be back with you very shortly. Thank you very much for staying on. And thank Mr. Chinwendu. And before we went on break, I was asking you that we know that the PIA provides the companies operating in different levels of the value chain must separate their operations. In your opinion, how will this provision influence the operations of these companies and the flow of their operations? Hmm. Ooh. I'm not sure if you are okay. You have to unmute.
Oh,
Yes, please unmute.
sorry,
Thank you.
sorry. I think I was muted. So I was saying that it's another interesting question. I think it's something that even operators are also having to deal with. To say, okay, how do we then manage our operations with the new PIA that we have? If we should convert today, how do we then deal with that? Because what you have is a situation where for every segment of operation within the industry, you're then required to have a separate license and also have a separate company running that business. I give you an example. So you have a company that currently it's into upstream petroleum operations, and you have gas. You also could have a downstream business, gas processing and distribution and all that. And you can do all that within one company and just have different streams of income, coming into the same company. But now what you have in the PIA is that for you to be able to do that, you are required to have separate companies and separate licenses doing that. So you're going to have a situation where upon conversion, you're going to have issues around transfer of assets and all that, reorganizing the business, transferring the existing licenses and businesses and assets to a new company. So if I speak on companies that have both upstream, maybe crude and gas investment, obviously it kind of affects the business because under the Petroleum Profit Tax Act and also what we used to call a associated gas framework arrangement, it kind of allows companies to um, consolidate their costs. So you can take your gas cost against your crude oil income. And obviously that allows you to make a quicker recovery because the tax rate under the PPTA, that Petroleum Profit Tax Act, is higher than what we have in the company's income tax act, which is 30%. And so if I'm able to take my gas costs against my crude revenue, I make a quicker recovery because my I'm taking that cost against a higher tax rate as against taking it against a lower tax rate. So with this new law in the PIA, I will no longer be able to do that because I would then have to set up a new company to run that gas business. So whatever gas cost I incur will then sit within that business. So obviously that is going to affect existing the economies of existing investment and future investment. Because if you have an investment that runs beyond, let's say 10, 20, 25 years, and the licenses that support that investment will probably expire before or expire in time soon. What that means is that company will then be forced to convert to PIA and then split that business into maybe 3, 4 companies with different licenses, and all that benefit that you would have gotten, by taking your cost against crude revenue, your gas cost against your crude revenue, you are no longer able to do that. However, it's not all doom, and because you then still have incentive for people that play in the gas sector, for instance. So if you are into maybe gas transportation, there's a tax holiday for you. If you're into gas utilization, there's a tax holiday. So the law recognizes the fact that we had some sweeteners or some incentive that encouraged people to consolidate both gas and crude cost and recover, make a quicker recovery. And in taking that away, what is done is to then provide some incentive to encourage people to still, go into gas investment. Because one of the things that investors used to consider was the fact that, okay, I could take a deduction against of my gas cost, take it against my crude revenue. But now that I'm not able to do that, the question then is, what then can I rely on? What is the sweetener for me to go into, gas investment, which we then have the tax holidays that are currently there. So obviously, that also will create some administrative burden because where you have one company that used to file, you had just a separate company with people and all that running that company. Now you're probably going to have like 4, 5 companies because you then have multiple licenses. Obviously, that comes with compliance cost as well because you're going to have to pay a statutory auditor or to prepare an account for you. You also have to pay a tax consultant to, review what you've done and assist you with tax filing. So all that comes with cost. So it's something that operators are then having to battle with to say, look, with this provision then requires me to have multiple companies that I'm going to be running. In some instances, you may then need to have separate finance function, depending on how you want to structure the business. But obviously, it comes with its own headache as well.
Thank you very much for that wonderful response to that question. Before I bring my question, let me recognize Omotayo Orosoya. He wants to know if there are provision for smaller companies to bid for contracts in PIA as in the former PPA from the OIC and other players.
Well, obviously, what the PIA is trying to do, and particularly in the downstream sector, is to encourage indigenous players, which is why, um, which is one of the reasons why you still have the provisions around what's it called, price regulation, because the whole essence is to avoid monopoly within the market and to encourage a free market environment where both smaller players can come in and bid for contracts. So to answer your question, the way the PIA encourages that, now it doesn't have specific provision that says small companies will need to bid for contract. But when you look at several provisions in the PIA, you then find out that it encourages it. The whole essence is to encourage smaller players and to participate within the industry, and then avoid a situation of monopoly.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Omotayo is satisfied with that response. Let me take you up on this as how to border on the regulations. One of the chapter of the PIA border on regulation guiding operations of a company in the host community. Do you believe that these provisions will improve the welfare of individuals in those communities? You mentioned this in your intro, talking about certain percentage that the people need to just disperse.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for that question. If I'm sure we are all familiar with the agitations of the people in the Niger Delta, for instance. Every now and then we are having discussions around how much goes to that area, and how much infrastructural development we have in that area, and how much benefit do they have, given the fact that a lot is being, taken out from their region. Now, what I would say with respect to the host community development trust fund is that what the law, attempts to do, or is to ensure that, unlike what we currently have, where you have, let's say, NDDC, for instance, Niger Delta Development Commission, and companies basically fund NDDC, and then NDDC can then decide on what to do with the fund. Now, what you have with the host community development trust is that the act requires, each company, each settler, as the act calls it, is required to then set up the host community development trust, for the benefit of the host communities, where they operate. Now, for that purpose, what the settler is then required to do is the settler will appoint and authorize a board of trustees. So when they have so the board of trustees, they will essentially run the trust. Now, in terms of funding, what the law provides for is that 3%, like I did mention at the beginning, 3% of the actual annual operating expenditure in the immediately preceding financial year of each settler with respect to their operations within that area will be required, they are required to transfer 3% of that cost to the host community development trust fund. Now, obviously, what the fund, the trust can then decide how to disburse that fund. Now, the interesting thing is that, given that you have a board of trustee, the composition of that board of trustee will also include members of the community. So, and it's no longer a case of the uh, board determining what project to do. Given the fact that you have members of the community there, they can then evaluate the kind of project, that needs to be um, built, or whatever it is that that community needs. They evaluate the needs of the community and then fund that project. So what that does is that you have the voices of the community members within the trust, determining what exactly the funds should be used for, and not just the board itself, without contribution from the members of the community, deciding what is good for the community. The community members will play a huge role in saying what they want, and what the trust will do is essentially to fund such developmental projects. So I would say that it's a good arrangement, because it kind of allows the community members to vote, to have a voice, with respect to how the fund is deployed.
Super, super, Mr. Enechi. The governance provisions for fiscal and otherwise, getting the host community to be partakers, and the way you have tried to enumerate it, hopefully, in strategy, implementation becomes a graveyard. Thanks for all that. As we are driving this to a close, I'd like to us to come back to gas. Um, Based on the PIA, what are the incentives available for companies looking to invest in the gas sector?
Thank you so much, Mr. Fasinke. I think I did touch on a bit of it when I was just answering one of the questions. Obviously, you have some incentives that we have in the PIA that speak to gas investors. One of which is a tax holiday if you are into gas utilization. And the question then is, um, what is gas utilization? Gas utilization essentially refers to activities that involve the use of gas as feedstock, such as gas to liquid, plants, petrochemical industries, fertilizer plant, power plant, mini NLNG plant, and things like that. So if you are engaged in that, the law says that you are entitled to a tax holiday of up to 5 years. Now, if you're also engaged in a if you have like a pipeline, for transportation of gas, you also then have additional incentive of another 5-year tax holiday. So for engaging in gas alone, you could get as high as 10-year tax holiday, and which is, I mean, it's not something that we used to have. It's not what we have in the current laws. So if you ask me, it's something that I would think is attractive enough for anybody who wants to play in that space. Because
Yeah.
obviously, what the government is trying to do is to encourage investment in gas. And but again, like I did mention, there are some other things that I still believe that we need to be taking care of, other than just the fiscal incentives. There are other
Mm,
issues that have bedeviled the gas industry, like
mm,
infrastructure, gas pricing and all that, and
mm,
obviously effective demand, which is what the PIA is trying to address when you speak about the domestic gas supply obligation, which
mm.
the PIA attempts to or wants to enforce to make sure that the IOCs adhere to the domestic gas supply obligation.
Fantastic. And Mr. Enechi, as an accountant, and as me as an accountant, and friends of accountants, and people who know little accounting but die hard business, men and women, SMEs, I will not let you out without asking this very important question. Now, the PIA is on temporary suspension, perhaps for 8 months. And so these incentives that you've spoken about that investors would have just rushed in is now standing still. The double whammy about that is that the plat is going for about 130. I believe that 130 as we speak on the back of the Russian Ukraine unrests. And so government is not enthused that with this plat going up, naturally the subsidy, the question of subsidy that has put a gateway in. I'd like to ask you, it looks like a quagmire. As we speak, across the nation today, I mean, diesel is going to close to about 500 naira per liter. The PMS, only God knows, being sold, at the black market rates. The production quota that we have been given by OPEC, 1.7, we're just doing 1.5, 1.6. So the double whammy is that we are losing up there, we are losing down there. What will be your advice to the operators? One, two, to government to get out of this quagmire, at least in the short term.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think you've used the right word, which is quagmire, because it's actually a big mess. And yeah, you're spot on saying that our production profile has really, I mean, for a very long time, the plan has always been to do at least about, to do above what we're currently doing. We're not even meeting our OPEC quota, So, and for us to do that, or rather, the reason we are not meeting our OPEC quota, or the reason we are not producing as much as we want to produce, is not unrelated to the fact that the kind of investment that we've always been clamoring for within the industry hasn't been there. In a very long time, I'm not aware of any IOC or any company that has made fresh investment in the oil and gas industry. What companies are essentially doing is just doing well maintenance, trying as much as possible to increase production from existing wells. Because for you to then make fresh investments, you've got to be mindful of the changes that could happen to the fiscal, which is why I spoke about the certainty that we currently have with the PIA. So what we expect is to see some form of gradual increase in investment, with respect to, maybe new wells being drilled and new acreages and being found and all that. So for government, for instance, and speaking about subsidy, and we not being able to benefit from the upward movement in crude oil price. Obviously, if you look at how much the NNPC is spending to fund subsidy, you realize where the supposed excess crude revenue that we ought to have, where it's going into. So it's a big problem. Rather than having that, in the past we used to have that an account called excess crude account. I'm not sure how much is in that account today, because what ought to go into that account is now being used to fund the subsidy. And the subsidy issue is a very, very sensitive issue in the country. If you ask me, a lot of people have said that we need to remove subsidy, and which is the right thing. But again, you also need to be mindful of the economic impact of subsidy removal. When you look at the impact of COVID-19 to businesses in the country, and people essentially even just trying to come out, you look at the inflation rate, unemployment, and all that. You've got to marry that, with removal of subsidy and the kind of impact it will have on the economy. So while it is good to remove subsidy, in doing that, timing is very important to say, okay, how do we do that? And when you're removing subsidy, do you have any cushion that you're going to put in place, to sort of cushion the impact that removal will have? Because is it going to have impact? Oh, yes. If you take out subsidy today and Nigerians begin to buy petrol at, market price, you'll probably be spending as much as 350 or close to 400 naira per liter. And obviously that will have impact on transportation cost as well. So the average man on the street, who will probably be paying 100 naira from one end to the other, will probably have to pay about 200 or 250. So when you look at all that, the question then is, what other thing is the government doing, to cushion the effect that subsidy removal will have? Now, but should we remove that subsidy? We should do that and begin to adjust to our realities, really.
In
So
fact,
what I would say to the government is
part of those realities, Mr. Enechi, is competition. Just like we have in telecoms,
exactly.
and it goes on and on. But we've got to be able to
Exactly.
bite the bullet, do it transparently, with character, with capacity, with compassion, and what have you. I'd like you to give us your final words on this topic. Just your parting words.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that the PIA is a game changer, and as chartered accountants and practitioners, it's important that we're very aware of the provisions of the PIA, as it speaks to how the oil and gas industry is going to be transformed, and how it will impact on the businesses of the companies that we all provide services to. So like I said, at some point, it's no longer business as usual. Things are changing, and you can't afford to sit on the sideline. Yeah, we're saying that the PIA has been suspended for some time, but you're not going to have to wait till the suspension or the delayed implementation is lifted. This is the time for you to be aware of what is going on is now. And I would like to also say a big thank you to the institute, especially to our president, and for providing this platform for us to share ideas and share expertise I think our members and online listeners will greatly benefit from this. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Mr. Akifatunke. You're doing a fantastic job, I must say. I've listened to a few of the program, and I must say that it keeps you, on. It's not something that you want to tune into and then switch off. There's always something you're going to learn.
Thank you
Even
very
I myself, who is a tax expert, it
Thank
was an
you
opportunity for me
very,
to also
very
learn.
much, Mr. Enechi. And it's the tip of the iceberg. Of course, you've seen my editorial team who are in the background. I'd like to thank you and would be asking you to come back. I'd like to thank and acknowledge our online participants and guests. Thanks for your questions. Well, our next episode is going to be Thursday, March 10, 2022. The venue will still be the ICAN online platforms, Facebook, YouTube at 6 p.m. West African time. The topic we are going to be looking at is insecurity and identity management. Our guests will be Andrew Echono, FCA, FCTI. Andrew Echono is a holder of a license in business competence from European Council for Business Competence in Vienna. Spent years navigating the waters of accounting, finance, audit, IT, project development and management, organization capacity building, and grants management. He is currently a service contractor with the US government. I'd like to ask my co-anchor very briefly your bye words for us on this episode.
The session today has been actually superb. I just want to tell our viewers, our listeners, our participants, don't miss the episode on Thursday talking about the identity. It's going to be
Exactly.
another level that we will take the ICAN on air to. See you definitely on Thursday, same time, same place, and the same online platform.
I'd like to quickly join to say that the ICAN Ninth International Accountants Conference, which is the UK version, with the theme social and economic climate challenges and opportunities for re-engineering the accountancy profession, takes place between the 10th, 11th, and 12th in 2022 at the Rochester Street, London, SE 165H. And you can make inquiries from Mr. Shegun Omar Yarewa, the chairman of the ICAN UK chapter. May I drop this quotation? Let me join the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria to wish our women folks in this one happy International Women's Day and tie with what our president had mentioned earlier. And I put this quote from her. Together with our male colleagues, we believe that we can create a better world. We believe we can build a society characterized by peace and progress, inclusive growth, and meaningful development. That quote is attributable to Mrs. Comfort Oluwayetayo, MNI, FCA, the 57th ICAN president. And I say the sun sets on our program today and will come your way Thursday, March 10, 2022. I say, be the change you always like to see. I remain Akifatunke, your anchor. ICAN on air. Bye for now.